All right, and welcome to another Tuesday. It's 5 o'clock, which means it's happy hour. We are off the clock and on the sauce. Wait, I think we need that. I'm not sure we can keep that tagline. We're workshopping it.
Yeah. It'll work out. Oh, I like the mason jar.
Oh yeah, well
Nice.
if you're gonna drink moonshine,
Mm-hmm.
you got to do it right. Although I
Nice.
cheat. I take my shine over ice.
I don't blame you. I don't blame you. I'm a iced coffee person myself because I don't drink small, and so so when I drink my coffee, I like it iced so that I can just
You don't waste time on it.
I don't want to waste time sipping, and I'm
You just
not a
get right into it.
sipper. Yep.
Well, okay, for those that are joining up or catching us up on other services, I am Rob. I stream under the name Lantern Noir. I have D&D games on Sunday nights and Mr. Jiggy's on Mondays and the Happy Hour on Tuesdays. And then with me is my dear friend who will introduce himself.
Graybeard of Graybeard's Tavern, and you can find me on the Twitter as Graybeard Tavern, and that has my whole schedule. Right now, I'm pretty much only streaming Thursdays over on Indoor Adventures, Fridays on G Game Nights, and Sundays at my own channel so that I can play with all my toys whilst streaming. And that's 10 a.m. Sunday mornings on Graybeard Tavern at Twitch.
Yep. And it's fun. I caught some of it this week.
Yeah,
I was lurking a bit.
I did a bonus extra hour afterwards, and then I ended up doing another bonus half an hour after the bonus hour because we played one of my favorite games, Battle Brothers, and I posted that yesterday on YouTube, like a Battle Brothers basics for anybody who wanted to get into that game. It just I know it's a real high level of entry game, but it's so fun and so amazing that I decided that I should put a video out for it. And I got kicked a little bit by one of my friends to do it. So, I had on a tunic and, a helmet and got to wave all my medieval toys around, and, it was a good time.
Well, if you're going to do it, you don't do it by half measures. I mean, you go in and do it.
That's my Card Hunter series on YouTube. I did it up. I hammed it up really good. But that's back when I had a video. I had an AV geek chained to the wall down here, and they would edit and actually do real production. So days gone by.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of work that goes into that side of things. It's one of the reasons why there are two reasons I like the idea of just limiting things to what the happy hours being a live show is. I thrive on audience interaction, so I love when people are asking us questions and we're trying to field legit answers. And the post-production work is a pain.
Yeah.
I'm still reeling from my kid's dance company where I put 17 hours on a 3-minute video that was aired once live.
That's what you said.
And has been set aside in the archives, never to be seen again.
Jeez.
So yeah, it's a labor of love. We like doing it. Well, a lot like Dungeons and Dragons. It's a lot of work, but we still end up doing it.
Yeah. Oh my goodness, such a labor of love. I remember buddy of mine ran a thing. It was a completely random dungeon because in advanced D&D, the old first edition, they had charts where you could just random dungeon, and so he had 17 pieces of graph paper, every one of them covered as much as he could by rolling randomly and putting a dungeon together. And it was 17 layers of this thing, and we played it because we were kids and we didn't have internet and YouTube and whatnot. So we just sat and ground this mega dungeon, and it was completely random. So you'd walk into a room in normal D&D, 10-foot pole, tapping every square as you walk into the room, and there's an altar and there's a gem, and you're like, okay, we detect magic and we go through all this, and in the end, it's just a gem. And then the next room over, you walk into, and the table's and the table's a mimic, and so you just, you never knew what was going to be next in that. It
I
was,
have I have not heard of the table as a mimic bit before. I have to file that one away.
yeah, there's actually a good meme out there that's like the bartender laughed, the party laughed, the table laughed. It was a mimic or something like that. It's one of those cute memes, stick.
I was catching one person's live stream, and she had made the big door to the castle they were sneaking into, like they were going through the back door. The door was the mimic.
Nice.
Like the entire back bottom corner of this castle was a giant, was built on a mimic. I'm like, well, that's harsh.
That is it. Yep, that's cool. I like the things where the whole building is the creature type stuff. Those are always the. Oh, that's a spoiler. Okay, I was about to give a spoiler away about a game, so I won't. I'll just play Darkest Dungeon.
Okay, I was gonna say, is it a recent one? Because I sometimes feel awkward about spoiling Curse of Strahd. But I'm like, on the other hand, it was published back in like '85.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. It's a vampire.
Well, and the thing that I'm kind of dilemmaing right now is my current group is like, yeah, we could totally do Curse of Strahd, and the one goes, yeah, I've run it like a bunch of times. It's awesome. And I'm like, so I only have 4 players. And a quarter of my player base already knows the entire adventure front to back. Mm-hmm. He's like, don't worry, man. I won't ruin it for everybody else. I'm like, yeah, I know, but I want you to have a good time with it.
Right.
And part of that is not knowing all the plots and the ins and the outs.
Yeah. And 2, playing a character who has plausible deniability. You would have to, 1, want to play it, 2, play a character that's not going to be like, I'm Mysterio, the mage, and I know, don't look out for that, and don't touch that, and we got to make sure we have Wolfsbane before we enter the forest of, I mean, it would be hard. That's why a lot of times I like playing the big dumb fighter. Because then, you know what I mean? Because then you just, the combat's coming, the things that trap, whatever, is people, particularly when I'm on a live stream and someone's going along with something and I just know what it is. I've had its stats in my head for 5 editions. A lot of times I'll just put my hand over my mouth because I don't want to get this big stupid grin. I'm like, oh, we are so fudged. This thing's gonna shred us.
This is not going to end well.
TPK.
Yeah, but that's, and he's in a similar spot too. He plays one of the party fighters, the low end, modest wisdom, good charisma fighter. So
always a good time.
He's in a good position to periodically kind of go, I don't know what's going to happen next.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
and that's a good thing.
Yeah, it's also too. I have a tendency to be a method player myself, so a lot of times if I am playing the fighter, I don't listen. I just kind of try to zone out, and then and it'll bite me in the butt because then it'll be like, hey, Hagark. Oh, that's me.
I'm supposed to kill it now, right?
But yeah, that's also too. I've noticed that probably for the last, I don't know, probably 2.5 to 3 years. And whenever I'm starting in a group, I almost always say I'll choose last. I always come into the campaign all excited, but then I'm like, come on, guys. Particularly before recently, I was in 6 games a week.
Oh.
And so I'm like, I was always like, I'm in 6 games a week. You guys all choose characters and I'll play filler because I'll have another opportunity, most likely in 2 hours after this game's done. So,
Well, that's. I mean, I've played so many characters over the years that for me, even it's like I have no strong passions. It's like if you tell me what the archetype I need to fill out the party is going to be, I'll find a fun twist on it that'll make it exciting for me to do. So you find your passion, and I'll plug holes here and there.
yes.
Which is only problematic when you play with a lot of other really reasonable people. Because then you fall in the trap of everybody is kind of just, well, what do you want to play? Well, I'm open. I can play anything. Well, I'll play anything too. Why don't you pick and I'll compliment you? No, I was thinking okay, just you pick. Yeah. My wife and I have run into that more than once. We've tried out new MMOs.
Yeah.
Like, what archetype are you going to take? Well, I'll play a compliment to you. Okay. Well, I don't know what I want to pick. It kind of depends on what you take.
Take the lead here, dearest. Come on. I'll bounce off of yours. If you want to be the wizard, that's great. I will be the chunk fighter or the ranger or whatever. Yeah.
Although
again,
lately we've turned into, well, one of us has to be a tank or a healer, or we're never going to get a group.
Right. Particularly in MMOs. Yeah, I can see that. I can totally see that. My significant other there, they haven't played an MMO in, my God, it's got to be, 6-7 years or more. I mean, since like D&D Online, I think was a thing. I think it was the last time we were playing MMOs together. So, wow, that's a long time ago.
Well, and D&D Online is still around.
Oh, that I did not know.
It has not. They have not closed it. They still put out content. Neverwinter, I think, has gone through a couple of like rebuilds as they've tried to find their stride and everything.
Yeah.
And they're surviving a lot on, you can make your own dungeons for it.
Nice.
It's got a built-in scripting language that they kind of stole from. They kind of adopted from other companies that under their umbrella. Where you can script things together and create like the adventures for other people to try, but you have millions of people playing, or thousands, I should say. So you have thousands of content creators.
You're right.
So it becomes really hard to separate what's a good one that'll be fun versus one that's been kind of cobbled together versus okay, this is the cheesiest enemy spawn system to get me the most XP.
we need a dungeon to grind house to get everyone to level 10 because we want to play this other dungeon.
Yep.
Yeah.
I'll admit I had one of those for Neverwinter Nights back in the day that a mod I had made where it was, okay, here are all the rooms for all the levels. You go in, talk to the person, and everything you need for that level is in there.
Back in the DDO days, there was I think it was called like the Waterworks or something, and that was that dungeon. It was like fun. It was a grind, but not a boring grind. It was a very fun grind. I rather enjoyed that one because there were always like parties waiting outside, like just hanging out and chatting and stuff, ready to be the next ones through the door.
Yep. Just waiting for that fourth, or I think they had groups of 6.
I can't remember.
Or 5, but it was always one of those. Yeah. We still need 1 or 2 more people, so we're all going to hang out here and sit there and shout until we get our last dude along, as it were. Which actually, my language creates, I think, a great segue into the topic we hemmed and hawed on. Where, and I said dude, and I'm like, and I know being old is not an excuse, but I am so bad at gender neutralizing my generic addresses. And it kind of gets to, we'd hemmed and hawed about whether or not we wanted to wade in on the great wheelchair debate of 2021. And for those not in the know, Dungeons and Dragons, the main company, hold on.
Does the jar go in the recycling or the trash?
It can go in the trash. Because it's full of hamburger grease. Yes, they don't want that in the recycling bin.
Just food,
we're a
trash.
No, we're not the debate. The debate is this. The Wizards of the Coast put out teasers for the new upcoming D&D supplement, Candlekeep Mysteries, which I'm like, oh my god, this is so what I need, and I need it like right now. Yes. And the reason I need it is it's going to be, 17 adventures?
Something like that.
Yeah, and they're all short mysteries. And so at first blush, you're like, okay, what's the big deal? But what they did in it is one of the designers is in a wheelchair, and they wrote an adventure specifically so that if someone were in a wheelchair in the adventure, so their character was in the wheelchair, there would never be a moment where they, as a character, would go, I can't get from A to B because there's an obstacle that my wheelchair can't clear.
Yeah.
So effectively, they created a wheelchair accessible dungeon.
No.
And the internet lost its collective mind.
Yeah. Late last year, it was the combat wheelchair itself that was the big hoo-ha, and I never got it. So I just kind of went, okay, cool, sounds all right by me, and then just didn't really look into it. And then as we talked about going here, I kind of poked some of the younger folks that I hang with, and I was like, wait, am I missing something? What's the deal here? And so they pointed me in the direction of a few articles and such, and I'm all about it. I absolutely think that we should definitely if you want to be a badass hero who has a disability, awesome. You should still be able to be the badass hero you want to be. And it shouldn't slow you down, because this is a fantasy world, and hell yeah,
Well, and I think it's interesting because what I saw a lot of the conversation orbited around was, and even in my internal conversations with friends and with my spouse and other gamers, was wheelchairs are not practical modes of transportation in a realistic setting. So even like watching Game of Thrones, Bran can only go to certain places realistically in a wheelchair. But that doesn't stop him from ever being where he needs to be to make the story happen, because it's a show and they just don't show the work to get him from point A to point B. They just put him there because that's what makes the story work.
Yeah.
But at the same time, there's a lot of stuff in games that we hand wave because they're fun.
Yeah.
And they make us feel cool. And I don't know about you, but I don't think I've ever had someone at a game table say my character has an eye patch. More often than not, nobody looks past the eye patch after initial character introductions and when they do character sketches. It's pretty common, I think, at most game tables to not go that means you have bad depth perception, that means you're going to have difficulties with ranged weapons, unless you are playing in a game system where that becomes a factor, where it's like, okay, we're going to assign disabilities, I'm going to get advantages over here, and the points all work out. But 9 times out of 10, things like that are just part of the character's backstory, and they're never thought of again, which feels so weird to have seen so many people be so furious about this being a thing that they had to deal with as a realism issue.
Yeah. For instance, in the past, I've had people who have had bad scores and then have said, okay, this is the reason I have the bad score. Like I lost a leg on a pirate ship, and so that is why my dexterity is X. Or I'm, I forget, there were a couple other ones that were really good like that. We had I played with a gentleman who was legally blind, and he played a blind archer, and we were like, yeah, that's awesome, Zen archer, let's go for it. And Bo, Bo was his name, and his real name, the person, and Bo was like, we just went, okay, yeah, you have depth. So you have mental powers or whatever. You have perception, hearing. You use your other senses, you know. And we didn't impose any kind of game mechanic on it or whatever. We were just like, great, that's your character, cool, let's do it, you know. So
Well,
yeah.
and even the games where there are mechanics, I'm thinking like GURPS,
Mm-hmm.
which I played often. I think somewhere around here I still have a bunch of GURPS books because I played it back in college. And I mean, everything was point based, and so you could say, okay, my character, if you wanted to have a need for glasses, you got extra points to spend on your character. If you wanted to have glasses for just reading, you got less points, but you got people, and you could spend them elsewhere. And there was like a whole subgroup of gamers that were, okay, I want to make the best Zen archer straight up from the GURPS rules. I'm going to take the bonus points I get for being blind, and I know just what I need to buy to offset them. And it was kind of weird because when you got to the end of the day, they were just about as good as any other archer once they were done allocating their points.
Yeah.
Which then loops back to the, well, you could have just said.
Right. Yep. And just played it. Let's do this, you know. I think that article is still floating around the internet somewhere where you can, and it was don't quote me, but I think it's Champions, the Champions system. You could build you could build Superman for a single point. Literally build Superman for one character point or whatever. It was so funny. And then they were like, blah, here's, you know, the kryptonite allergy and build it all this way and that, and then this is how he does this, and this is it was a hilarious article.
Well, like, and the thing about Champions and that genre of games, which does not, I mean, there's a few games I like it out there, but I don't think it has survived nearly as well into the modern era as games like Dungeons and Dragons have, is that's where everyone that should have been a lawyer missed their calling because they thought lawyering was about good arguing, and it's not. It's about being able to read and effectively quote rules.
yes.
A rules lawyer is not a thing. That's an oxymoron. Every lawyer is by definition a rules lawyer. That's just the way that's the nature of the gig. And I'm not saying that as a pejorative either. I mean, I think some of the best people I know are lawyers, and they're dang good at going, but here are the rules. We should be following them.
Yeah. Yeah. It's really funny too, not to skate that direction or whatever, but yeah, definitely I always say, if you end up with a rules lawyer at the table, use the rules lawyer. You know,
Yep.
Just be like, hey, you know, Dan, how's that go? Okay, cool. We'll monkey with it later if that's the, you know, if there is still any doubt at the table, you like we'll play it this way now. Let's get on with the game and move on. I mean, like we said a couple weeks ago, the whole thing with the reason third edition is the way it is because there were too many aggressive, untrusting GMs back in the early days, in like second edition and stuff. So third edition had to have a rule for everything, you know, 8 pages of grappling and whatnot.
Yeah, and what I've learned over the years, this is where my happy spot is as a dungeon master, is I'm here to make sure the story is moving, and I'm going to let everybody else figure out how the rules are working, and then when we come up with a disagreement about rules, I'll make a final decision. Because I put too much time into the writing. I don't have time to figure out all the 8 pages of rules on grappling.
And that, again, that's why, like I said, when I went through and looked at the wheelchair itself debate, I was like, okay, that's cool. But I mean, great. It doesn't give them any advantages. It just makes them, you know, it levels the playing field so that they can be who they want to be in this game. You know, awesome character. Let's go. So I didn't see the Candlekeep stuff. I kind of missed out on that thing. So what was the gist was that they
having we don't, since we haven't seen it yet, we're still working off what WotC has said is coming. But what they have said is coming is that there's a designer who does use a wheelchair, and they really felt strongly that they wanted to have a dungeon that had been written so that when you followed it rules as written, they would be able to access the entire dungeon from their wheelchair because their character was in a wheelchair.
Yeah.
And that was what caused the big hoo-ha. And most of the hoo-ha seemed to be tied around kind of go at different angles. One of them being that the standard social justice warriors are taking away all of our fun. But another angle was, and then there was the realism angle, which is, well, that doesn't make sense. Why would anyone who's making a dungeon make it easier to get through? And we need our dungeons to be very logical. We want this to be a really nitty gritty, like, why is that there? Why is that there? Which I also sparks some of the best counter arguments, which is, how on earth do you think they get all those mechanisms for those traps down dozens of flights of stairs without a ramp?
Yeah.
Have you tried moving massive stone blocks without some kind of mechanical assistance? The elevator was invented like in Egypt. They used it to put things up on, they built the pyramids. So like, let's not get too crazy here. And then there was like, the lot just that we don't need this. This is dumb. This is giving into things. And then the realism people are another aspect. And they kind of went around and around and around for about a week. And it did sort of die down.
Yeah.
As there's some other new thing to be all upset about. But it was weird though, because it forced me to really do a lot of introspection about how I felt as someone who is heterosexual, cisgendered, as far as I know, fully able. 98% fully able. They've got this stupid breathing condition, but that's, we're not talking that many points off for that.
Yeah.
And just kind of like where I look at the whole issue from that privilege, that I get to look at the whole of the issue because it doesn't directly impact me.
Yeah.
I get to have a certain freedom to kind of look back. And the one thing I do like to think that I bring to this particular table today is that I've been around for nearly half a century. And I've been gaming for most of that nearly half a century. So I've played with a lot of different people. So at least I can speak to some experience about the kind of people I interact with.
Yeah, I don't know. I spent a year on crutches and in a wheelchair, and I was a holy terror. And because I was in my teens, and as a sports person, well, I played sports kind of thing, and wheelies and 180 spins and everything. And if you see the guys who play like rugby or basketball in wheelchairs, those guys are buff. There's these serious buff. I would hate to be rammed by have them zoom one of their super chairs at me, man. I'm telling you, it would be amazing. A very, very, very painful situation. So, and we talked very briefly. My daughter was in a wheelchair for years and years, and she was blind for 6 months. And over the years, she has really appreciated superheroes and stuff that, and characters in stories who have disabilities, and the way they are portrayed in such. Like when she was blind, Daredevil was very cool, because her hearing to this day is still stupid outrageous, and so she always takes solace and appreciates that you focus more on your other senses. So that's disabilities, wheelchairs and such has been a big part of our life for quite some time.
Okay, so Shad's got an interesting point he's bringing up here, or they are bringing up here, about the concept of privilege. I think that was me talking, And when I was talking about privilege, I'm talking about me as the dude at the table privilege. I've never, for example, walked into, well, I mean, locally, you're not that local, but locally there's a game night that used to be held pre-pandemic at a little brew pub downtown Pontiac. And I never once went to a game night there thinking about how I was going to get in and out. And there was a gentleman there who was in a powered wheelchair. And of course now it's being laggy. I'm sorry about that. My numbers look good here. So hopefully it settles down for you. But I never for a moment have to think about how am I going to get in? How am I going to get my game to the table? How am I going to go to the bathroom? How am I going to get my beer back to the table to play with everybody? These are all things that are completely out of my mind. And then there was a gentleman, and he managed everything very well, but he was in a wheelchair. And he has to think about that sort of thing. Am I going to be able to get my chair in there? Am I going to be able to get my chair to the bathroom? The closest I had to deal with it was, if I ever have a game night at my house, can I invite this guy to come? Mm-hmm. And knowing I really can't, because my house doesn't support him coming in with his chair. We'd have to negotiate how we were gonna, do this together. And so when I brought up privilege in that context, it was the player having privilege, that ability to not have to think about certain things that do impact people who are not me.
Yeah. I mean, it's definitely, we had ramps, we had, the van, we had, all the accoutrement to go with the situation. And definitely is a different way of thinking. And you got to reflect back and look at how can we make it accessible to get those people to the table.
Okay, so now the question goes on to so now we're talking about in the game world. How does and the discussion that Chad brought up was the rich son of a king having all this extra starting gold. We need the vision. Let's see, catch up with you now here. Wheelchair change to aid those people. When do the vision privileged people at WotC start making books for those with eyesight problems, or maps that follow color theory for the colorblind? Forget large font books. Okay, so I think I kind of see where you're going here. I think one thing I would say, there's a lot there. I do think things like large font print books. I do think that colorblind compliant graphics. Those should not be issues that we need to talk about, in the sense that WotC should be handling that. And the fact that they aren't does, I think, bring some credence to the critique that WotC's decision to say, here's a wheelchair accessible dungeon for people who want to envision themselves as themselves in a fantasy game that is in their wheelchairs, might not be as genuine as they say it is, because they're not doing these other things. Like, I'll put that out there. Right. Why aren't they? I do think lots of people might say, well, why don't you buy your books on D&D Beyond and then use your browser to blow it up? Which you shouldn't have to. WotC should be on top of this. So I'm like, I got your back on that one.
Yeah. The so for instance, I'm dyslexic, and I got in on a project that was a player's screen, and they were very cognizant of the fact that people out there are dyslexic, and that this player's screen was supposed to make things easier for people, and hence they used dyslexic friendly fonts on it. My daughter, who has intermediate memory problems, the player screen is great for her because it's dyslexic, fonts. It's laid out very spacey, very large. She can use this player's screen to help her play. Like, she has a hard time remembering dice, you know, and so there's a little dice chart right there on this player's screen. If I could think of what it is, I'd give them a shout out, but I can't think of what it was called.
Well, and that's the kind of
So,
thing you
know.
see that with a lot of other designers over the years, and I could go through the books to find them, but a lot of games have gotten in the habit of when they put what they want to put in what they want you to roll, they have an icon that shows the die style, so you can start to match iconery to your D10s and your D20s and the ones that always killed my groups were the D12 and the D8
Yep.
and the D10. And the number of times I've seen people throw a D12 when they meant to throw a D20.
Yeah.
Because they're the big roundy ones. And no, speaking in typo is exactly what we usually speak. That's absolutely what we do around here. We'll decode it with you. You're more than welcome to do that.
Yeah, a lot of times I won't even see it.
Well, and I do.
My brain will try to fix it as I read it and put it together. So,
Sometimes people help people with dyslexia, makes them look harder at the words to make sure that. I have never heard of that, but that makes some sense.
oh, yeah, interesting. Yeah, maybe. I know that I'm old, and they had no idea. I didn't know I had dyslexia until I was in college. People just, you're a horrible speller. You can't write. F. Here's your paperback. F. And so until I got to college, I had no idea. I mean, literally, we would do spelling tests on Fridays, and kids would read my spelling test out loud and laugh and stuff, and I'd be like, I don't know. I try.
It looked right when I wrote it. Yeah, I was teaching for 15 years before a colleague who's a special ed teacher that teamed with me at one point leaned over and said, "You do realize that if you were in high school today, you would be medicated, right? Because your ADHD is not good. You're barely managing it." I'm like, I had never really thought about that, but the way I cycle through projects, you're probably not wrong. I do think it's interesting, the idea, though, of the wheelchair ramps and the I'm going to push back a little bit politely here, that the wheelchair ramps in the dungeon doing nothing for real people in the real world. And here's what I'm going to add to that. One of the things that I think is being lost in all of this is that if you look below our graphics, Greg and I both made us as miniatures, and it took no work, really. We just hopped in there and we threw some things together, and so we've got the axe and the fire and the ball of flame, which was also going to be the lantern of knowledge. It just looked really bad. We can totally do that. But when I think about the conversation where the person who identifies as a wheelchair user wanting to see themselves as a fantasy character without having the fight to say, well, I have to overcome I have to figure out how to overcome my disability in the game, just like I do in the real world. And I can't even really see myself being in a wheelchair in the game because it's too hard on the party and it's too hard on everybody else. I can't be me and go on adventures. I have to be a not wheelchair bound me. And I can't speak from experience, having only been on crutches myself for a summer when I broke my foot, but I can imagine that that's a real heavy burden to think. That sense of there's no room for me to do this.
Yeah. How do I fit in? How is this gonna happen? We've been watching Vikings and Ivar the Boneless in the later seasons. He rides around on a chariot, and he basically drags himself everywhere, and then he has these crutches that he made and stuff. I mean, I'm like, okay, that's a pretty good representation of someone who would have these difficulties and how not survive, but thrive even in this kind of a situation, you know, a medieval situation. So I just think that, yeah, I think that we should just, you know, you should be able to be who you want to be and not worry about the little stuff, you know.
Yeah. Well, and thank you, by the way, for hosting us over on your channel, Shad.
Oh.
That we appreciate the spreading the word out. That's always a good thing. I do think. Okay, that's an interesting point there. Appropriating Egyptian culture as much. Yeah, there's something to be said there. I think though, when you say the game is escapism and not representation, I'm not sure how much I agree with you on that. And here's part of it. Not everybody, I think, has to come to an RPG to get to escape as much as they want to create. And sometimes, like, Grave can probably speak more to this than I can, but sometimes it's that exploring ourselves that can make gaming really interesting. I'm going to actually kick over to Grave for this for a few, so I don't dominate, because I'm going to go. I'm going to go for a while if y'all let me on that. So I want to let him go first.
Yeah, I over the last couple of years, you can really see. I noticed something about myself, that I have a tendency to create characters in threes, and I was playing in a lot of games, so it would be like, and then as I looked back, it was it was a diary of where I was mentally at the time, you know.
Yep.
I was the big you know, the big older brother type for about 3 characters, and then I was the gun toting blast everybody, you know, character, the shoot 'em up character for, you know, for like 3 campaigns, and then I was the doctor for like 3 campaigns, and then the inventor for like 3 campaigns. And it's really funny how, you know, or the sad boy. I played like 3 really dark characters in a row. And yeah, I definitely think that I use the experience, role play, to reflect and try new things and sort out, you know, my emotions or feelings in the game. So yeah, definitely there's a lot of that there, where, you know, sometimes you put too much of yourself in a character. and hence there's that session bleed, you know. I had a character in a campaign that literally was, I was having trouble after each session. Every you know, X night, I would literally be like, guys, I'm just depressed. I don't know what it is about this character in this game.
Well, and I laugh when you talk about that, because I look at my games through my 20s, and every character I played, and there was something going on in my life that informed that character I made. So like when I was in college, I went through a phase where I was not a great person. I was not a great partner to the girls I dated. And towards the end of college, I created a character who was a young teenage vampire desperately trying to get her humanity back. And so I went to the far opposite of myself, and I won't say I was escaping being me, because I was exploring a different story that I needed to be telling about a life. And then shortly after that, I made a LARP character. And if you want to talk about putting yourself into a game, you play a LARP, where not only do you have to do a lot of fun, crazy stuff, but you are very much bound by your physicality. I would never be, no matter how well I wanted to armor up, I could never be the hulking brute. And I was not built, nor did I eat in a way that would let me be the super slender, stealthy. Like, that's not happening. We had game rules to get around the fact that I wasn't very attractive either. But, you know, you do what you got to do. And so I think that the amount that we escape and we represent is a balancing act. I think there's a lot to be said for how we want to play that particular angle when we make up our characters and our stories for them. So I think that it's easy to say it's about escaping and not about representing, but at the same time, I think we should give people the freedom to want to be represented. I think that's a really powerful thing that brings more people into the game.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's really the crux of it. If you want, so here's a side note along those lines. I used to go to miniature war game conventions, almost exclusively historic miniature war games. And it used to be the people who would be there to run these games were so horrible, such horrible people that I'm like, you are pushing people away from these games. Like we were playing a game and there was a half track, and this kid literally like couldn't have been, in his mid-teens. He put all his little soldiers in the back of the half track, stacked them up, and this guy came over and beat him down like a drill sergeant. If you ever want to play at this table again, why are you messing up these miniatures? The flocking's going to come off those, and you never should put them in the thing. They should be represented in that vehicle and all this. And I'm like, whoa. That kid is going to be like, why did I come here? Why did I pay my $14 to get in the door if I'm going to be yelled at? You're killing the hobby, people. You're killing the hobby. Let people be who they want to be and do, not run roughshod or anything, but let them play. Let's play, let's have fun, Well,
so. that is a big part of it. Shad brought up the point then and now, referring to the Middle Ages. You don't put people in a wheelchair on the oh, that's a good point. I didn't think about trying that. I'd have to shut down though to change it, I think. I've never really explored transcoding. And I'm still new enough to streaming. I haven't really looked deep into my settings. This is the first time I've actually had someone really comment on video quality. So I'm going to see what I can do while we're live. I might not be able to do anything today. So it might be a case of coming back to YouTube, and then maybe we can we're here every Tuesday, so you can always bring our shit back for us for another round later. But I do think I'm going back up through the chat now. This wheelchair and frontline combat, and I think you're absolutely right. I think in the real Middle Ages, in the real world, you don't send someone out with a shield and a spear in a wheelchair. That's not the way it works. I think if you want to play games that are focused on hardcore realism, if you want to break out a game where there's a lot of mechanics to how you build your character, there's a lot of mechanics to how you build your abilities and I guess you could argue disabilities, then that's great. And if that's what everyone wants to do, that's good. Yeah, I know I can't change anything on OBS. But I also think that a lot of role-playing games, and Dungeons & Dragons, I think, is one of them, it's all about what you want to use as defining parts of your character. And I think before we pitch your hypothetical to Graybeard here, yeah, that's true. They will give me the transcoding when they want to. When you talk about putting your characters in here, I think there's a lot about that conversation we should be having about what everyone wants and what exactly the goal of for all of the characters that are in the game. So like if I want to play a character who's blind or deaf, let's say deaf. I know a little more about the deaf community than I do the blind community. I should be able to talk to the person running the game to say, I want my character to be deaf, but I don't want it to be a major plot point in the game. I want it to be a side comment. And we should be able to negotiate as adults. Okay, here's how that's going to play out. And it doesn't have to be I got ya. because your characters definitely wouldn't know that unless I agreed ahead of time that I want that to be a factor. I might say, I want her to be deaf, but I want to know that it's going to be like, we just kind of assume she has a way of getting around it for most major situations.
Yeah, or if it is the connection point between them and another character, like they want it to be a situation where, you know, they can read lips or whatever, but if anything else is going on, the other character is their brother or their sister or their best friend or whatever, and then taps them on the shoulder and is like, you know, be quiet, or you know, over here, or you know, if they want it to be that connection or something, I'd say, yeah, that's a good cool part, and that would be interesting if they wanted to explore that. Go for it, definitely. That'd be cool.
Okay.
So
Yeah. All right, real quick, I'm gonna jump on the thing that came up in chat before I go back to where we were, and that is, you must do. The only must in an RPG is have fun, and I don't care what name is attached to it. I don't care who. No, that's bullshit. The only rule for your group is everyone must have fun. And if everyone's not having fun, then your intel's bad. And we can debate whether or not we may or may not tackle is there an option to remove wheelchair access? Because that might be past where we are today.
right,
But I do think that there's like there's no such thing as everyone must do.
Yeah.
Now that said, I also say if you're not making it possible for everyone at your game table to have fun, you're not doing it right either.
Yeah, the and two, I've heard the arguments about, you know, you must have fun. No. Fun is a concept. Are you entertained? Are you having a good time? Because I'm going to tell you, some of the best role play experiences in my life have been, you know, this, you know, she died. Oh God, you know, the people are crying at the table, and you know, it's that sort of thing that no one would say that was a ha 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 fun time. They would be like, that was amazing, you know. So I think WebDM did a show, an episode called something like The Tyranny of Fun. So I just want to throw a slide ball in there and say fun takes many forms.
It does.
Particularly in role play games. If you walk away and you want to come back to the table next week, bang, you have succeeded.
Yeah, and and there's a lot to be said. I think I'll have to dig more into what was said at the D&D Celebration 2000 about the in October, about the not having the option to not have wheelchair access, because I think that seems weird, because if my group doesn't have any players that would apply to, then it's not something we need to worry about. But that said, and this kind of slides into, like, to me, the reason I wanted to tackle this, and I wanted to tackle it as an old white guy who primarily is probably mostly going to hear be heard by other old white guys, is the concept of what are we going to do to make sure other non-old white guys feel like they belong in a game. And the longer version of that is, when I was in high school, I often played the one girl in our party. I made the one female character. And in being high school nerds and all guys, that became a major plot point. Like, that was the thing. Rob's character's job is to seduce the guards so we can get past. That's why we have a woman with us, so she can seduce the guards. And I remember the first time somebody's girlfriend hung out with us and wanted to play the game with us. We were playing Shadowrun, actually. And they turned to her and said, okay, so go seduce the guards with Rob's character so we can get in. And she looked at them and went, what? And yeah, her character was a woman, but it wasn't in her vision that would be the reason she was on the team.
Yeah.
And I feel like there's a lot of conversation that we can have as players and dungeon masters, to be mindful to what extent people's identities are their identity or a plot point.
Right. Yeah, it's one thing if somebody is playing the, the sexy seduce people character, and it's another thing with everyone at the table goes, your job, do it. You know, you're like, huh? Wait, no, that's not who I am. I am I may be beautiful, but I would just blast the guards with lightning and walk through because I'm bad. It's, I'm tough and hardcore. I don't seduce people. I hack them down with my great axe. Oh, so
Well, it also gets into to what extent the womanhood is a plot point.
yeah,
To what extent is, and you are accurate, by the way, Shad, that in Shadowrun nobody would be in a wheelchair because they could get cyber legs. Although I'll see your augmentation. I'll raise you my Shadowrunner is still in a wheelchair because he hasn't saved up enough money yet to get the doc to fix the legs. But I also think Shadowrun does lean more into we're trying to be a realistic sim style game. But it gets into to what extent do we want it to be defining? And I feel like when we were kids, we had a bad tendency to assume things like sex, gender, racial expression, even to a degree disability, would be major defining features of these characters, which they might be part of their identity, but to what extent is it the story driver?
Right.
So, like another example I would think of would be sexual orientation. Yes, the character is gay. That doesn't mean that it's going to ever come up in the game. It's not going to affect who they interact with because it's not meant to be a plot point. It's just part of their character identity.
Right.
And I think younger me was really bad at understanding the difference.
Right. I having decades, I remember, high school D&D, whenever you tried to, because I was always the DM, like, until probably 5 years ago. I was almost always the storyteller. I very rarely played in games. But where was I headed with that? Totally lost. The train has derailed and left the station. I always tried to, like in high school, I tried to introduce, romantic storylines, or again, this was the late 80s, introduce gay characters and stuff, and there was such a societal weirdness at the time. We're a bunch of kids, boys, sitting around a table, and one boy is saying that this woman is coming on to me. She must be a doppelganger. I cut her head off. I was like, oh, you're killing me. I want to tell these stories, these tales or whatever, and you guys' silliness is busting, just popping holes in all my good story. And then, as the late 80s, early 90s, and more and more girls came into the hobby, it was amazing. But yet at the same time, then you had to play power politics, because like you're saying, people had expectations, and there's the girl at the table. Well, I'll tell you how this is done, and if you need dice, I've got some extra dice, and all that garbage. That I'm so glad that we're sort of past all of that. That has really, it's been amazing to see that grow, and having all the shows out there that people can watch and be like, wow, that's really cool. Let's let's do that, and have examples of how people can play who they want to play. And it's good to see, people of color, people of different sexual orientations, playing characters that more represent them at the table. It's just amazing and fantastic to see happening.
Yep. And when it hits every hobby, because I don't know if you remember if you're a Trekkie, but there was a lot of hoo-ha when Tuvok came on the scene with Star Trek Voyager, because everyone knows Vulcans are white.
Yes. Oh my God, yes.
And one could argue that Star Trek had up until that moment, had developed lore that different non-human races were all kind of monochromatic within themselves, which also seems terribly boring when you stop and think about it.
Mm-hmm.
But then the idea, when could blacks? Okay, I'm going to pin that. We are going to talk about that in a few seconds,
Right.
very briefly, unless Gray wants to overrule me on that.
I can't see it right
okay.
now. I'm behind because of the dyslexia. It's hard for me to sometimes watch chat, but
I'll fill you in when we get to it.
All right, pin it and come back.
But the idea though was that, and I didn't appreciate at the time because I was in early college, is that everyone who was a big Star Trek fan, a good third of the fan base couldn't ever dress up as a Vulcan and go to a convention. And it's like, it's a little bit weird to sort of like say, hey, like at the time I was thinking, yeah, that makes sense. Vulcans should be white. Okay, this is a little weird. But now, like looking back after the years, I know a lot of people of different races who would want to say, I want to look like I'm a Vulcan. And now they can, because it's been established that Vulcans, like humans, come in the same range of humanoid colors.
Yeah. Andorrans are always blue. Orion slave girls are always green.
Yeah. Or a shade of them. But even within those groups, you still had, a lot of different ethnic people, a lot of ethnic humans can play the role of an Orion, male or female. It's not
I see what you're saying.
limited only to one angle on it.
Yeah.
Which gets into things like that, which is kind of neat. I will say very briefly, I don't think we're going to tackle it this week, but when could blacks not play a black character? I think that's a bigger topic that we're not going to get into today. I think there's a lot of interesting debate that I don't want to tackle today about emulating other human races by humans in a performance set. Now, I think from a game point of view, anybody can be any race they want in any game. My wife's character is African American in Red Dead Online. And we often kind of banter about their backstory, she would be a first generation free woman in 1890. And my character is a first generation Irish American, and probably doesn't like her very much because the Irish, as much as I'm loath to admit it, the Irish were pretty massive racists through the 19th century in America. Let's
put a pin in that and definitely come back to it and maybe do a show on that when we can maybe get our thoughts together a little better on something along those lines, particularly since that had come up that kind of thing had come up last year too, in like Curse of Strahd, rewriting to move the gypsies and stuff. So yeah, let's definitely put a pin in that and maybe in the next couple weeks make that a show topic.
Yeah. That might even be like a case where we do some outreach prior to, because I think that might be, it's one thing for us to talk about our experiences over the years, but I think when we start really getting deep into racial politics and racial issues, we do have to be mindful that we are two old white dudes, and there are certain things we can't speak to adequately. So I don't know. We do she has passed, but every once in a while we had to remind my grandmother-in-law that she should not talk about the days that her husband did the blackface minstrel show for the fundraisers at the church. That is not something we should be sharing in pleasant company in 2010. And she was always very shocked that we would stop her when she started into, well, you know, back when we did fundraisers, we don't. How about we not?
Time, 15-yard penalty on the field.
It's still a one-up on my other grandmother-in-law, who would actually say, well, you know, let's be clear. Hitler did keep the trains running on time.
La 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 la. Yep.
So we have a ways to go.
Yep.
Before we get to the great spots we want to be at. I mean, I'm swimming back through all of Shad's got these great ideas. We need Shad to be here every Tuesday because Shad's got great stuff to add. But so going back from that, yes, propagation happens off screen. I think there's a difference though between there's like three things I hear there. I hear sex, I hear sexual orientation, and I hear character identity. And I think the three things actually are slightly separated, because you can have a character who's gay, that's their orientation, but it doesn't always turn into, actually, let me take that back. It's sex, romantic relationships, orientation. And you don't have to have all of them in the game at once. So you can have a gay character who happens to be gay, and you never follow a romantic thing. It's a thing. And then you can have the romantic relationship role play, and then you can have the, okay, we're going to go off to and we're going to,
the veils, the black curtain,
curtains fall,
fade to black. Yeah, that's a whole another thing that's like safety issues. You know, the safety tools that are out there, the lines and veils and X's and O's and all that we should maybe spend a day talking about too.
Well, it's interesting because this is a couple of times Shad's brought up the idea that Dungeons and Dragons is like, it's about frontline combat and adventuring, and I think. And maybe this is part of having been around as long as we have. I don't know if I fully agree Dungeons & Dragons is all about frontline combat and being on an adventure. I mean, by which I mean in a dungeon holding a torch, creeping forward.
So here's it. If you look at the book and it's like, you know, say it's 150 pages and 100 of those pages are about combat, that game's about combat. You know, it generally, I have to kind of agree that Dungeons and Dragons really is, it spends most of its time being about it, as far as the books go. Okay. The mechanics of the game are about combat. Generally speaking, for D&D, there are, you know, thousands and thousands of role-play games out there now. Saga of the Icelanders is about being an Icelander in that culture of that time period. You know, there's no magic, there's no craziness. It's not about combat. It is about a cultural situation and you living in that culture. Yes, there is combat, but there's all sorts of crazy politics and things going on too. And I think that it's been our experience, particularly looking at 40 plus years, that yes, it used to be roll numbers, here's a grid, someone is the mapper, and someone is mapping on another piece of graph paper exactly how the dungeon goes, and it's it was kind of that. And then we started to tell stories, and then the stories became the fun part. We realized that 5 years later, we didn't go, and then I rolled a 17 and oh man, I totally, I speared that guy and that was, we talk about speared and killed the guy, or, oh my God, that monster, or, you rolled that one, which is a game mechanic thing, but it's what happened. It's not the mechanics. And so we started to realize that the story was what brought us back to the table, not the rolling the dice. So
Yeah. Well, I think though, but okay, I think from the context of fairness, I think part of the reason Dungeons and Dragons ends up with so many rules is not that the intention is to be a combat simulator, as much as it is the hardest things to get to keep feeling fair are things that involve conflicts. And physical combat is a very difficult way it's a very difficult thing to feel like you have a fair adjudication compared to skill checks. I'm going to deceive you. Okay, that's a deception roll versus versus an insight roll. We're gonna steal from 4th edition and we're gonna bring up a skill challenge and we're gonna do best of 4, kind of thing. You don't need a lot of like hard and fast with the DC system. You don't with the assigning a difficulty number. You don't need a lot of rules to get the nitty gritty like you do for combat. Common ground we need that we cannot make up for ourselves. That is the definition of rules. I can agree with you on that. I do think though that the idea that Dungeons and Dragons is inherently about frontline combat also misses a lot that goes into if you look at the modern adventures. A lot of time is spent not in combat.
Yes, and then that's what I'm trying to say with that is that's where we've come from. It started as a literal war game on a board on a map, and we have come from wargaming to over the years people have realized I want more story. I want more story. Give me more story. And then these other game systems have come out because, for instance, Burning Wheel combat is just like a skill challenge. There is no complicated. There's no hit points. I take my hammer from my forge and I hit him in the head. And it's, what is your intent? I intend to knock him out. I intend to kill him with the hammer. And it's the same roll, no matter what you wanted to do in that. So you don't have to have hit points and armor classes and all that. It still comes down to, okay, like you said, for a skill, I tried to deceive them. I tried to kill them. One roll. It's still the same thing. So that's where I was saying the mechanics of Dungeons and Dragons definitely, there are rules for it because you can do very cool things. And I think that's kind of where I was saying that the game is about combat because there's 80 pages of combat rules. Because you got to have hit points and you want to do this and you want to have special abilities and you want to level up. And, by the time I'm 10th level, I walk into the room and there's, 100 orcs and I laugh, a hearty warrior laugh. And, dive in, grab my great axe and I'm like, and dive into the orcs and, start cleaving.
You didn't know I was signing up to stream with Carrot Top's older cousin, did you? The ultimate prop combat.
So many toys.
Fancy Heartbreakers trying to emulate homes. Yeah, okay. I can appreciate it. And I think what my thought is, keeping this into germane to where we are, and it loops into the wheelchair debate, and it loops back into the game you play. I've skirted off of saying it outright as we've talked about this. Is that sense of making sure everyone that comes to your table still feels like they have a place at your table. And I know that the more narrative RPGs, it's a lot easier to screw that up. Because it's things like, you want to play a character who's, here's my go-to lately. I had this, I don't know why it clicked today. Have you seen The Dragon Prince on Netflix?
The first season, probably the first 4 episodes.
The captain of the guard is deaf. And At no time is it anything other than interesting character. It's well done. She has good relationships with her translator, her second in command, or no, her aide de camp. He's not second in command; he's an aide de camp. And every once in a while, you end up with moments where she signs stuff, and the only way you know what she said if you don't sign is body language, facial expression, and reactions. But I can also see in a D&D game someone saying, I want my character to be deaf, but I don't want it to make the game less fun for everybody.
Yeah.
And that's what I mean by because you raised the question, how is playing things like make no sense to many, facilitate welcoming to all at the game table. Well, if I have a woman sit down at my table who says, I want to be a woman and I want to be deaf, and then I say, okay, but you have to understand, as a woman in this universe, you're going to be at a disadvantage because this is a male-dominated society that we play in. And as someone who's deaf, you're going to have to deal with all these other mechanical, very real challenges. There's going to be a downside. And I think that that's a dangerous road. I think it's easy to do when we get obsessed with realism, but it's not going to make her feel welcome.
Right. No.
And I think that's part of why I kind of wanted to get into this conversation. It's because I think that's the kind of thing we need to be negotiating as we plan our games.
Yeah. Yeah, as we look and build towards a communal story and having an entertaining evening, a fun time, definitely should be something that talk to your players. Just talk to them. If somebody like we were saying, if they want to play a person or a disabled person, then they say, great, how much of this do we want to incorporate? And like you were saying, is it gonna affect this or that? Do you want it to be a plot point? Do you want it to just be a thing about your character? Particularly like you were saying in the orientation argument, or not argument, but a statement, my character's gay. So doesn't, will it ever come up? Maybe not. Maybe not, so just make people comfortable, talk to people, and try to have a good time.
Well, I think something like the comment, though, I think you're right. We mentioned earlier the peg leg debate.
Mm-hmm.
To what extent would we be dealing with my character has a peg leg? Might be a point where the DM says, or I could say as a player, hey, can we smuggle something into town through my leg? And the DM might go, that's clever. You can do that this time. And I don't know if we need a rule for it as much as I think it helps for the people that feel hidebound to the rules to know they should be accepting of it. And I feel like that's another element to this whole thing that we're not going to get to this week, which is when do you home rule and when do you don't, and what do you do with people that disagree with you on that topic?
Right. Real quick, I wanted to mention something about the option to have that dungeon that they're going to put in the Candlekeep book not wheelchair accessible. I would say the thing is that you don't need to not make it a wheelchair accessible, because no one would even know. If I ran that dungeon with all people who were, no one had that kind of physical disability, no one would ever say anything about it. They'd be like, okay, we're going down the ramp to the next level. they would, you know what I mean? The players would never, if it hadn't been on the internet for people to fight about, and someone played that module, just played it, not DM'd it, but just played it, they would never ever, they would never think of it. They would never think, oh gosh darn it, they wrote this for wheelchair people. You know what I mean? You would never it would never come up. It would just never come up. So why does it matter to those
But it matters.
ableist individuals who, you know, they want to argue about it, I guess.
Yeah. I think there's a good point here, which is the difference. Chad brought up the point is the difference between playing a game and writing fan fiction. And I think that I'm a little nervous because that feels a little tongue in cheek at us with the idea that it's about the story. Role playing games are about telling stories. Actually, most gaming is a form of storytelling. You might not think of it as such. You might think of it as a strict competition. But at the end of the day, you're competing to tell the better story within the rules established. A game of chess is a story. It's a story of two competing armies outmaneuvering each other and being clever at how you deploy your forces and reading your opponent. And I think Dungeons and Dragons has always been a form of storytelling game. In the 70s, it was a much more combat-based story. A lot like if you look at the movies. A lot of it was special effects, which were guys in rubber suits getting whacked with swords and ketchup spraying. But they were stories. And I think that's the kind of thing that, you know, things have changed over the years, but I'm hesitant to say that's bad. I feel like the more we can do to help people sit down at our game tables and say, I'm enjoying this experience, and the more we create rules to help the people at the table say, here's how you help create that. No, we don't have time for that rant today. But you know what? We are happy to tackle that in the coming week. Already mocking. Oh, we get mocked. Ooh. You know what, Gray? I think we've arrived. I think we have a nemesis.
Dun, dun, dun.
Nemesis. That's not the right lyric. But I also do think it's interesting because shout-outs first of all, I'm going to follow your channel back after this and find that YouTube video because I'm curious now. You got me hooked. Normally I would toss that because I don't like people self-promoting too much, but I'm leaving it because I want to see it. But I do think claiming D&D is storytelling is missing all the other play styles and playing the one true wayism card. Ooh. Okay, we're not tackling that this week. But I do think it goes back to a comment you made, and it kind of goes back to where we started this conversation. And that gets back to the comment where we were talking about the deaf PC, and Chad brought up the point, which was, I want to make sure I don't say it out of context. Is she playing the wrong game? And that, I think, is where I want to wrap my last comment of the day is, she's only playing the wrong game if she's not having a good time at my table. And I think part of my goal in any social event is to be sure everyone feels better at the end of it. And maybe they cry because their favorite character died in a horrific way, or maybe we all kind of agreed that we were going to take on the danger of random death. If the dice don't go your way, man, this is a hardcore campaign. If I roll a 20, because my DM rolling is out in the open, and your character takes a crit, that's the end of them. We all knew when we signed up that's what we wanted to play, and we're all cool with it. Then there is no wrong game. Yeah. So I also think I'd be very nervous telling someone who said, I am a woman, I am a lesbian, I want to have a character who looks like me. I don't think Dungeons & Dragons is the game to tell them, well, here are all the disadvantages you're going to have to take for those things. Like I will argue for a while that that's a dangerous place to be because that's not where we should be heading.
Yeah, I think you should be able to be who you want and you know enjoy the experience. So it for me, it's yeah. I will completely agree with your statement there, and and I think that's a pretty good place to begin wrapping it up for the day.
Yeah, well, it's 6:30. They're going to kick us out in a few. And
All
our
right.
wives are going to demand that we show up at the house.
Yeah, we'll have to finish these.
Mine's empty. Peach flavored moonshine from Smoky Mountain, by the way. I will plug them. They are not a sponsor, but I'm happy to give them attention because they make moonshine you can actually stomach straight up.
Yeah, I haven't been stirring it, so all the bourbon was right at the bottom there.
Well, just be careful driving home. That's a tough flight of stairs to climb.
Yeah, it is a tough flight. Getting through the mess down here,
I hear you. We're gonna wrap it up. We're here every Tuesday at 5 p.m. Eastern time. The work gets out and we get on. So hopefully you come back. We'll talk more D&D. Gray, where are we gonna see you playing D&D this week?
You can see me Thursday nights at 8:30 Eastern Standard Time over on Indoor Adventures, and then on Friday night you can see me at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time over on G Game Knights Kniggets with Swords and Shields. And see me over there. We're playing the Cypher system, and we're doing like a cyberpunk sprawl kind of thing, but we're on a moon space station, and it's insane and crazy. And then Sunday mornings, come watch me play with all my toys. I got to fire my crossbow a lot here in the basement on last Sunday, so it was a good time with that. 10-ish a.m. on Sunday morning at my channel, Graybeard Tavern.
No S.
That's no S.
No S.
Definitely not.
Yeah. And then it popped up in the chat. This channel, Lantern Noir Presents, has a Discord. You're welcome to join. It's called the, what did I end up calling it? Loft Noir. And, I always hang out there where we have fun conversations. We share our memes. I post when I'm going live. My schedule is Friday and Saturday nights, variety gaming with whoever's around. Sunday nights is Dungeons and Dragons. We're continuing the Mists of Ever Twilight. We're actually into our final session for the current story arc that they are in. They've now discovered that indeed the Banshee problem is not a Banshee roaming freely, but is connected to the nobles in town, who've been using it to artificially prolong their lives. And now they have to figure out what to do with the fact that the middle daughter has no idea this has been being done to her.
Oh.
So what do you do? Which is my favorite kind of storyline for them. And then Monday nights, we have our Monday Night Mysteries. This next week, we're going to do part 2 of the Tams murders, because after 3 hours, we have no suspects and we had to go to bed. So that's where you find me. As always, it's been a pleasure. Gray, any final parting thoughts before we sign out for the day?
Absolutely not. This was great, and it was nice to have interaction, and we'll hopefully see you next week, and we can go round and round about some other stuff.
Oh, yeah. We've got, between the two of us, we have over 90 years of gaming experience. We're more than happy to throw it against the wall and see what sticks. So until the next time we meet, please wear a mask, and above all else, stay safe.